Okay, this is just a visual of what Revolution Prep offers. Some of those things include practice exams, online tutoring options, online parent presentations, student 101 strategy sessions, faculty benefits, and scholarships to provide equity and access. Next slide, please. Just a little more detail about some of those offerings. We offer the PSAT, ACT, and SAT 101s, which are strategy sessions. They're 2 hours long, and they offer tips and tricks for taking these exams. We like to offer those a couple weeks out before they take either a practice exam or their official exam. Then again, just mentioning our exams. The students will receive at the very end of taking those practice exams a score report, and it gives them detail about how they've done and where they may want to focus to achieve a little bit of a better score. And then on the right are just some lists of presentations that we offer, parent presentations. These are all great offerings, very popular, and we are excited to let you know that we will be offering some brand new presentations for the 2022-2023 school year. Next. Just to dive a little deeper into our tutoring options, we have private tutoring, which is one-on-one, very customizable. We have tutoring in small groups up to 3 students. We have small group courses that focus just on the standardized test PSAT, SAT, and ACT. And then we offer homework help for grades 6 through 12, which is a great resource students can pop in if they're having a hard time with one of their problems in maybe calculus or physics, and get the help that they need, and then jump right out. So it's a great resource. That's our tutoring. So the next slide. Okay, that's everything. So if you want to learn a little bit more about us, just go on to revolutionprep.com, or feel free to contact me directly, Nicole Diskin or Marlene Fishbein, who is our national director. Thanks so much for your time this morning. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much, Nicole. We really appreciate you sharing that information about Revolution Prep and the great resources that it can provide to our students. And we appreciate Revolution Prep for being a sponsor of all of the SACAC drive-in workshops. So what we're going to do now is just turn everything over to Mr. Todd Harris, who is the Dr. Todd Harris, who's the Senior Associate Dean of Students at Methodist University here in Fayetteville. And he's going to share some information about supporting our students as they head off to college. I'm going to stop sharing, Todd, so that you'll be able to share your screen.
Okay, is that working? You can see the first screen? Great. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for your flexibility in allowing me to talk with you at 9 o'clock this morning. As a Dean of Students on a college campus, there are all kinds of surprises. And when you have a 24/7 operation, you just don't know what to expect next. And so we have a lot going on, and I needed to be prepared to support a student in the hospital and probably deal with his family here some point later on this morning. So thank you for your flexibility. I want to share a little story with you that I think might resonate with why I believe it's extremely important to support first-generation college students. I was at a conference about 3 years ago, and Associate Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor was there to speak with us, and she was delightful. In fact, she did not sit on stage. She took her microphone and walked all around 5,000 people to engage us. But she told a story about how she was a first-generation student, went off to, I believe, Princeton, and did very well, not all that well the first semester or first year, but as she really grew into her own and became more confident with herself, did extremely well. One day she was in her room, and a friend of hers came in to visit and saw in the garbage can a letter from Phi Beta Kappa. And a friend of hers said, why is this in the garbage can? And she replied that they had invited her to become a member of Phi Beta Kappa, but they wanted her to pay dues or to pay some type of membership fee. And she said, I don't really need to do anything like that. Well, why would I want to pay for something like that? And her friend said, you don't understand how important Phi Beta Kappa is to your future. I will pay your dues. Well, anyway, she ended up paying them, and she, of course, became a member of Phi Beta Kappa and told us that there were multiple times throughout her career as she was sitting across the table interviewing for a position, and she saw the interviewers circle Phi Beta Kappa on her resume. And the point of this story is that first generation college students don't always know what they are supposed to value and what's important to them to take advantage of on a college campus. Now, that can certainly be true with second and third generation students as well, but I have worked with a lot of first generation students, and I know that they don't always have the knowledge or have the family support structure to say you have to go take advantage of this or go to this center on campus, go talk to this advisor or whomever. So that's what I want to do with you today, is talk with you about the importance of this, but I'm going to frame this. I was thinking all week about what could be useful to you and what could you do for your students now or before they graduate and before you send them off to college. Because if you're like me, once they graduate and they move on, you may have a little bit of contact, but not much direct contact any longer. Before we get started, let's try to define first generation college students. And I want to give us a broad definition. I think there are different ways to define that. Certainly, you might say that the individual would have parents or a parent that never attended college. That seems obvious. It might be that they're defined as a parent that never went to a four-year institution, perhaps. Or they could be a student who had a parent that started college and did not complete college. Either way you look at it, I think that we will just define a broad definition of what first generation college students are. So what I want you to consider today and what I'm going to lay out for you in the next 30 or 45 minutes is what I would consider a pre-college orientation program. I'm suggesting to you that before your students graduate, perhaps towards the end of May before graduation, that you set aside an hour where you invite your students that are first generation, and you may not limit to that. You may open this up to every student, but in particular, I would really market this to first generation students and invite them to come perhaps after school and give them an hour of your time to do what I'm about to show you, what I would call a pre-college orientation program. There are so many opportunities on college campuses that it can be really overwhelming. And college goes by very, very quickly. I have a sophomore at NC State in Raleigh, and he's realizing that he's almost halfway finished and is not taking advantage of nearly enough that the campus has to offer. What I'm going to share with you is likely what you'll find on much larger campuses than ours. I'm at Methodist University. We have about 2,000 students. We have most of these resources, but not to the extent that a large public institution or a private institute, larger private institution might have. But let's say that you're going to have this pre-college orientation program for your students later in the year, maybe in May. These are some pointers that, first of all, I would start with when you're talking to your students. Students need to have a sense of what their vision is for going to college. Why do they really want to be there? What is their goal? Maybe a mission that they might have. I heard a student just the other day who met with me in my office, who is a first-gen student, tell me that he really sees himself not wanting to follow the path of his father. He loves his father. He's seen his father work very, very hard in some difficult jobs, and he now feels motivated to get that college degree and to have more for himself and to have more opportunity for himself. That could be his personal mission. I mean, we didn't write it out, but that's what I felt like he was describing to me. I think students who go into college with a real clear understanding about why they are committed to the next 4 years, they find that they're more focused. They find that they grab onto those opportunities and they get everything out of college that they possibly can when they have that sense of vision. It's also important, I believe, for you all to normalize some of the concerns or the fears that first-gen students may deal with. All students have concerns and fears, maybe separating from their parents, dealing with their roommate. Can they handle the academic rigor of college life? But for first-gen students, some of those fears and concerns can be overwhelming. So if you were to ask students, perhaps maybe anonymously, they write it down, and then you have 3 or 4 concerns that students bring forward anonymously, then you can talk about those. Let the group talk about them, because when you normalize feelings, you recognize that you're not in this alone. And then you recognize also you can move forward together. Adopt a belonging mindset. Oftentimes, first-gen students will feel like they don't necessarily belong because it seems like in a classroom, everybody around them is more prepared than they are, or has sort of more understanding of college life. They grew up around a college campus, their parents went to college, and they just feel a little bit like an outsider. But what they need to do is to go in and understand that they do belong and that everybody has a purpose and a place and matters on a college campus. And they need to recognize that and understand that in themselves. The term a one-stop person on campus, that may be a little bit hard to find or identify. But what I mean by that is students need to find that person that they could go to for lots of different types of questions, rather than running all over the campus trying to ask somebody in one office and then run into the next office. If there's a one-stop person, and often that might be their academic advisor, that could be the place where they always turn to try to get answers. Speaking of advisors, utilize the advisors. Students are going to have access to lots of different types of advisors. Certainly they will have access to academic advisors. They'll all be assigned an academic advisor. If they live on campus, they will have a resident assistant, sometimes called a resident advisor, an older student that will have lots of knowledge about resources on campus. Sometimes students who are in undecided majors may have an extra or a different type of advisor that will work with them and help them explore their interests and help them really refine what they want to do in college. Utilize faculty office hours. All faculty provide office hours. Most of the time, those office hours are fairly limited, but successful students are going to go to those office hours. Even if there's not a lot they need to discuss, they will identify themselves with that faculty member. They will spend a few minutes, be it 10 or 15 minutes, just saying, I'm in your class. I'm looking forward to your class. I'm committed to your class. I want to know that if I need some help, how can I reach you? What's the best way to communicate with you? Just establishing a little bit of a relationship and some rapport with faculty will really go pretty far. Now, a small campus, you're going to find faculty reaching out to students probably more than a larger institution. So depending on where they go, they may have to take responsibility for going to those faculty members themselves. Put someone in your corner. And what I really mean by that is find somebody on that campus that you can trust, that believes in you, that you can go to when things get a little bit difficult, and they will for every student. Every student has ups and downs. But where do you go? Who do you turn to that you trust? You want to hear their advice. You can cry on their shoulder. Someone you can put in your corner. And I don't really mean your mom or your dad or your grandmother. I'm talking about somebody on the campus. So seek out those individuals. Also find your people. And in order to find your people, the people you're going to want to spend your evenings with on campus, or the weekends, or going to games or activities, you have to get out. You have to put yourself out there. You have to go to meetings. Again, turn to your resident assistant, find out what's going on campus. When you see flyers everywhere, get up your nerve and go to those meetings, join things. You may end up joining 3 or 4 things early in the semester and then find that you really only want to commit to 1 or 2 of those. And then you find your people. And so that's really, really critical for student success, is to find your group on the campus. Certainly take care of your well-being. And there are lots of dimensions to well-being, but probably your emotional well-being and your physical well-being rise to the top. That means eating well, getting some exercise, walking to class, taking some time for yourself to decompress. Pray if you do that, whatever you need to do to keep yourself balanced and to maintain healthy well-being. Again, I sort of spoke about getting involved, but it's really critical because students will find that they have lots of extra hours in the day and they don't know how to manage that time. And what I hear all the time from my students is that they have an hour in between classes and they know they could utilize that hour, but they don't do it. They get on their phones. And these phones are wonderful for staying connected, but they really are the biggest problem when it comes to distractions and procrastination. So getting involved, I find that students who are more involved, who occupy their time more frequently rather than having downtime, actually are more productive and do better at school. And a lot of times schools, particularly bigger institutions, will have pre-orientation programs for first generation students. And if those are available, I would highly recommend that students go to those. Larger schools will typically have multiple orientations throughout the summer, and you choose one of those that is convenient, and you go and stay on campus one night. Well, you don't meet everybody, clearly, because that's not all 4,000 freshmen. But if they have a pre-orientation program that probably will happen right before school starts, students should take advantage of that. So as we're moving along in this pre-orientation or pre-college program that you may be doing towards the end of the semester for you, I want to talk about academic resources. That's probably the least fun to talk about, but probably the most important. Lots of schools have many of these types of resources on campus. And at schools like Methodist, the resource may really only be one individual. But at UNC Chapel Hill or University of Georgia, for instance, you're going to have lots of folks working in these offices on campus. Some schools have academic advising centers where you can really just walk in and talk to any advisor. You may not be, perhaps you're assigned an advisor, but that advisor may be difficult to get a hold of that particular day. You could walk into that center and see an advisor that day. They could pull up all your information and give you some understanding about what class would work in your major or how you are on track for graduating. Study abroad is something that many first-gen students don't consider, but they will find that it's actually more affordable and more accessible to them than they can imagine. And study abroad doesn't really mean going away for an entire year. When I was at Georgetown University, students, half of the junior class went away for the entire year, actually fall and spring semester. That's a long time to spend 25% of your time abroad. Well, most students will take one semester, but there are often January terms, where you can go abroad for 4 weeks, or you could even do a study abroad trip for 1 week during spring break. So there are lots of great options. And those types of opportunities really broaden your horizons. They help you get to know other types of students that you may not socialize with. They can really be life-changing experiences. So encourage first-gen students to take advantage of those study abroad opportunities. Writing centers are important. Many students struggle with writing these days, particularly first-gen students. And I would highly encourage the students to write their first paper, to go right in the beginning when you get the assignment and sit down with a writing center tutor or professional to help you craft out how you're going to and organize your paper. And then as you write it, go back again. Utilize these folks. They want to work with students, but they need the students to walk in the door. So go use those. Tutoring centers are available everywhere, all around campus. It's pretty easy to find tutors for just about anything. Some students may need accessibility or disability services on campus. It may be that they need extra time to take a test. It may be that they need a quiet space that's set aside for them. So they will work with these offices on campus to either to be given extra time or just to be given things to make their education more accessible within reasonable, we call these reasonable accommodations. There's only so far they can go with this. But if we've had a couple of completely blind students on our campus, so we worked with getting them Braille music. One student's actually a music major. So these offices will support students in that regard. Language labs is certainly for foreign languages. Those are available. Computer labs all around campus if you're taking computer classes. Math labs, many students need extra help with math classes. These are all over campuses. And again, they may be small on small campuses, but they're available. Some schools offer academic support services or academic skill building that maybe call them success coaches. And so when you're trying to figure out how to maximize your time and how to utilize, how to sit down and stay focused and how to organize your day in such a way that you can get your work done and you can still meet your own goals of wanting to go work out or go to practice if you're on a team, or to just have some downtime to hang out with your friends or maybe play video games. There's a lot of time in a day and students don't realize how much time is available. And these coaches can help you figure out how to go from that more structured high school class schedule to all of this extra time and freedom that you have living off at college. And of course, library services, folks all in these libraries are really willing and able to sit down with you and help you learn how to research or to get research for a paper, or even maybe help you write a paper, to help you talk about certain topics you might want to write in a paper. So these are professionals and that are very well adapted to helping students get through some of their courses. Lots of schools have student life resources. They may be called student affairs, campus life, different terms for these big offices, and all kinds of support structures and offices fall under this area. And as a dean of students, my day really is filled with students who are have all kinds of things going on with them. Just in this week, it was several students with either anxiety issues, or they were up in the middle of the night having trouble because of a girlfriend broke up. And what I've noticed about students is that when there's a serious emergency, you just give them about 48 hours and all of a sudden everything is turned around completely. Students live in real time at the moment, and a crisis becomes a crisis, and it's almost overwhelming, and they need somebody on a campus to go talk to. I typically do a lot of triage with students. I will sit 18 hours a week easily with students hearing their stories. And anyway, and then we may triage them to a college counselor. We may get them to a career counselor. They may want to just come back and spend more time with me. It just depends on the relationship that I build with students. But you can always start with a dean of students office on any college campus, and then they're going to funnel you to the right place. Career centers are everywhere, and oftentimes students don't think about career centers until maybe their junior or their senior years. But really, freshmen should start going to career centers early on, partly because employers want to see that students have been working or doing something in their field of study, so they have a little bit more to offer than just a degree. And career centers can help students find some meaningful work, perhaps some internships in the summer, or they may find an internship on campus. So there are lots of ways to get some real life work that's related to their major, and the career center professionals can help students get on that plan. They're also good about helping students figure out what they may want to major in. So if they come as a gen ed student and they have to choose a major by some point in their sophomore year, career centers are great for helping you look at yourself and understand your personal interests and your skills and what kinds of careers really are appealing to you. Hopefully students don't have to deal with student conduct on campus, but all college campuses have a code of conduct about how students' behavior is. We expect certain things out of our students so that we can keep our campuses safe, that we can keep them as a learning environment that they need to be, so that people feel that they can live on campus without any bias or harassment. I mean, there are lots of things that fall under student code of conduct. And if a student finds that they're involved in some type of infraction, they'll be called into a hearing or a meeting with a judicial officer or campus conduct officer on the college campus. And there are lots of pieces to that process that they'll need to understand, and that will be explained to them early on in orientation. But often they're not going to hear everything that they need to know. So I would encourage students to know where their code of conduct is and where their student handbook is. Typically it's online. They won't read it until they're in a panic to figure out what's going to happen. But if you're on a small campus, what often happens for me is that students find out that they've been documented for an alleged violation, and they often will come running to my office before we even have time to schedule a hearing. And that's when I can sit down with them and tell them to relax, and you're not going to be suspended for having one beer on the campus. But that can certainly be extremely disruptive to a student's life when they believe that something's going to happen to them and they may end up losing their opportunity to be on campus or to be a student. Many schools have public safety offices, and some actually have campus police where they're sworn officers and they carry guns. Those are incredibly important, folks, because they are often responding to students for any kind of potential crime on campus, an intruder on campus. This is where alerts are going to be generated out of the public safety office that will be disseminated across the campus. We call our program Alert Us, and so you'll get a text if maybe there's been a break-in on campus or a robbery on campus. So public safety is there 24/7. They're really the only staff that's on campus all of the time. Big schools have really well-developed health services professionals, and they have medical doctors on campus. Small schools typically don't. They might have a physician assistant or a nurse practitioner. But if you're a large public institution, you will have access to quite a few resources when it comes to health services, and they typically are very inexpensive. So as a student, utilize those services. Go see those doctors on campus or the nurses for help. Counseling services are also very extensive on large campuses. When I was at Georgetown, we had 2 full-time psychiatrists and about 10 psychologists in addition to licensed clinical counselors. So but we don't have that here at Methodist. So there just depends on where you go, but always schools are going to have health and counseling services. If you live on campus, you're going to have a whole housing and residence life staff, and they are there to help you fit into a community and to find a community they really work on mattering and inclusiveness and helping students find their place, find their niche. They are the safety net of a college campus, the residence life staff, because they're there 24 hours a day. They're the resident assistants, the students who are typically juniors and seniors, are charged with getting out and knowing their residents really well and knowing them well enough to know when they need to be concerned and to bring a student's name forward to a dean of students office, for instance, and to try to catch that student when it seems as if they are their anxiety has reached a level that is unmanageable, or they seem more depressed, or they seem more disconnected from their friends. For whatever reason, Res Life staff they are definitely in the trenches, as they say, and they are really, truly the safety net of a college campus. You need to get out. Students should always get out and get some exercise, whether it is something within playing intramurals, maybe it's swimming in the pool on campus. Lots and lots of opportunities are available for students to get out, either outdoor ed, perhaps they're going on hikes on the weekend or backpacking. There's so much available to students to take care of themselves physically. That's, again, a part of their well-being. My son is a part of a fraternity, and because he started in the fall of 2020, when everything was completely online at NC State and everybody was wearing masks, Greek life, joining that fraternity, saved his whole experience. And by Thanksgiving, he had 21 best friends, is what he told us around the Thanksgiving table. So I highly encourage students to consider getting involved in sororities or fraternities. I know that some have a bad rap, but really, I know a lot of young men and women involved in Greek life on campus. And it's a wonderful experience to find your place and to find a community of fellow friends and brothers and sisters. Also, most campuses have a new student orientation office. And that's the office that's going to plan new student orientation all throughout the summer on a large campus or a small campus like Methodist. We will have one orientation program for all the freshmen right before classes begin. But the large schools have those offices available year-round, and they will do all types of programs. And that's a great way for students to get involved, to become orientation leaders. Some more resources available for students on campuses. Most schools have multicultural affairs offices, and they're really working on supporting all types of organizations and students, more or less minority students on campus, so they find their place, they have a voice, they feel supported, and then these offices will hold programs that are really geared to the whole campus to expand the learning, expand the mind and the understanding of all types of individuals across the campus. So they supplement what students are learning in the classroom, and we bring it into the residence halls, into the student centers, and just broaden students' understanding of one another. The LGBTQIA offices, which sometimes are called that, and there can be other names. Obviously, that's very similar to multicultural in the sense it's working with a certain population to support those individuals, but also it's much more about outreach and understanding, and same way you would see as a multicultural office. And some schools, larger schools, will have women's centers on campus that are really serving particularly women population, looking for gender equity, supporting Women's History Month, doing lots of wonderful programming where students can find their voice on the campus. Some schools have a designated office around civic engagement or service learning, where they are reaching out into the community. When I was at Georgetown, because it's a Jesuit school, there was a lot of outreach out into the community when it came to college students going into elementary schools and tutoring kids, or going out into the community and working with the elderly. There's so many wonderful ways, mission trips, you name it. So that's, again, another way to give back to the community and learn and meet new students that you may not be in your social circles. So students should consider that. We have a campus ministry or office of religious life because we're a Methodist affiliated school, but even the state institutions will have some type of support around religious life or a chaplain on campus. So students who are seeking to get involved in those areas, maybe Fellowship of Christian Athletes or different ways, students can find their place, and they will find lots of different faith traditions where they can, again, find and celebrate their faith. And unfortunately, the Title IX office is not somewhere anybody wants to go, but if a student feels that they have been harassed or sexually assaulted, for instance, a Title IX office is going to be the place where they need to turn to get that kind of support. There are also a few other resources I thought of that didn't really fall under academic or student life areas, but it's important for students to know where the financial aid office is, because all throughout their 4 years, they're going to be seeking financial aid, more than likely, or they're going to have scholarships that they need to renew. They may find that they qualify for an additional scholarship. Just because you get scholarships at the end of your senior year of high school does not mean that there are not scholarships available even on into your sophomore, junior, senior year. I'm aware of students who worked really hard to seek out scholarships. They did well their freshman year. They had great grades. They qualified for additional money a little bit later on as sophomores and juniors. So know where that office is. It never hurts just to go in and say, well, I'm trying to pay for college on my own. Can you help me understand where I can get some financial aid support? And what can I make a plan for how I'm going to work towards maintaining my aid or actually acquiring more aid? Work study is also a great way for students to make a little money on campus. You're not well paid. I think on our campus, it's probably minimum wage, but there are a couple advantages to it. One advantage is that you're working on the campus, so you don't need to get in the car and go drive anywhere. The second advantage is that oftentimes the supervisors who oversee these work study students lean more towards the study than the work. So it may be that they are in an office, perhaps answering a telephone, but when there's not much to do, the supervisor says, use your time to study. So you can sit there and study and get paid as long as you're available to answer the phone or swipe a student ID to let them into the gym, for instance. We have work studies all over our campus, and they do really interesting things. We have students who are working their sports management, for instance. And so they work for our athletics department, and 4 or 5 or even 6 students will work a lacrosse game, from running the game clock to calling out stats, you name it. It's really interesting how many work study students on our campus find so many different avenues to build their skills, to get involved, and to make a little extra money. And also, students might not think about an alumni center, but truthfully, strong alumni networks help students find either internships or find job opportunities. And so as you're getting closer to senior year of college, it would be wise to go in and talk with the alumni center or the people that handle alumni on campus and say, look, I'm in sports marketing. I'm wondering if you know anybody who works in that field. Can you at least build a bridge for us, make a connection? And so that's another office that most big folks don't really consider, but they're there for our students. So that, I think, would probably cover a 1-hour pre-college orientation program. If you were to do that with your students towards the end of May, I think they'd get a lot out of it. This is my contact information here at Methodist University in Fayetteville and toharris@methodist.edu. Please feel free at any time. I love to be a resource. I actually have a senior in high school. We're waiting. He's gotten in where he wants to go, but we're waiting on one more school next Wednesday. I think we'll find out. And so I'm in that boat right now. I'll be an empty nester come August, and I'm really ready for it. So anyway, I'll take questions now, I suppose, if that's what we're trying to do.
Yes, absolutely. I'd opened it up. Anyone who has a question, please feel free to pop it into the Q&A. And I'll just start with, I think one of the things that we all have noticed is getting students ready to receive the information. I mean, this is a lot of great information about what they can expect and what they should be pursuing. So do you have insight from your experiences in student affairs, but do you have advice for us as counselors about how we can get our students ready to receive this information and to understand the transition that they're getting ready to make?
One thing I might recommend, if you are lucky enough to live in a town where you have a university, fortunately, Joanna and I, work and live pretty close to each other. So she uses me as a resource and I use her as a resource, have now for 2 or 3 years. If you can make contact with some folks on a college campus, I could see that there would be some value in asking a student at that university to come back and co-present with you. Sometimes 18-year-old high school students will hear these stories a little bit better, perhaps, than they would even from somebody my age. So when you talk about receiving or kind of taking this in, they may be able to hear you present what I just gave you, but then a couple of real anecdotes or real life examples about why that really worked. I mean, some of those pointers, honestly, I've heard students tell me, but I also watched a few YouTube videos just to sort of expand what I wanted to share with you all. Hearing directly from students really can help students. It brings it home for students. So if you're wanting them to take it all in, and again, as I often think during our orientation, if they retain a third of what we say, then we've done pretty well. So they'll come away, and it could be too that what you do is you do this orientation, and then at the very end, you say, write down 3 things that resonated with you. Write down 3 things that stuck in your mind that are going to matter to you. And if that's all they get, fine, because see, they'll hear all of this again during their orientation at the institution where they'll be attending this fall.
We have a question in the Q&A. How does your institution go about welcoming new students and transfer students?
Well, we have one big welcome orientation. So all of our students are lumped together. So when we have about 650 new students. We don't call them freshmen because some of those are transfer students. So they're all new students to Methodist. And we gather, all of us gather, including the parents that are there, in the big auditorium on campus. And that's when everybody is welcome. From the president welcomes them, our NSO, New Student Orientation captain, that's generally a senior, welcomes them. The student government president welcomes them. A lot of folks come forward to welcome them. And then all 650 of those students have been assigned a small group. And the small groups are roughly 24 students in a group. Each small group has 1 or 2 orientation leaders. And so at the end of that big welcome rally, we call it, the orientation leaders will come up on stage with great big signs in their hand, and they say, I'm Todd Harris, I'm the orientation leader for group number 1. You're going to meet me in that corner over there, and when we're finished. And so after they do all that, then the students get up out of their seats and they have a name tag, and it tells them which group they're in, because we make the name tags the day before, and they'll know they're in group 1, and off they go with their orientation leaders. And then from 600 and some students, you're down into 24, and that becomes really less intimidating, much more manageable. And we spend the first hour doing icebreakers, get to know you activities, welcoming activities on a much smaller scale. Then we go back large again. Later in the evening, we're back out into the large group where faculty are there and all the staff are there, and everybody's engaging students to try to make them feel like we're a family. So that really goes on the entire 2 days of orientation, and then we transfer that over to Res Life staff that holds programs. Granted, some of the students don't live on campus, so there is a bit of a disadvantage if you're not here in the evening. If you come for a few hours for classes and then leave. In fact, I met a student yesterday whom I had never met before, and she won our Miss Methodist contest, which is a talent type show. And I said, well, I've never seen you around campus. She said, well, I've been commuting from out in Grays Creek. Joanna knows where that is. And she's finally going to get involved her senior year. And so it's harder to engage commuters. But then we typically, and a lot of schools will follow this up with Welcome Week. So all the student groups are out there during the whole first week at tables, holding programs, reaching out to students saying, come over to our table. How about joining this club? And we also do that during new student orientation. We have fairs, so like you might think of them as conference style tables where you walk around, and just about every imaginable student organization, academic resource, student affairs, student life resource are all there with tables. So if you choose to be involved, you are going to find and meet everybody during that first week of school. They're there for you. But if you choose not to be involved, you're going to really miss out. So I feel like students who don't get on that train, because that train just starts moving pretty rapidly in the first few weeks. We often talk in student life, student affairs, about the first 6 weeks of school being the absolute most critical. They're the most critical to attend class, the most critical to get organized and stay on top of your academics. They're the most critical to meet people, to start making some friends. They're the most critical to finding the best way to manage your time and to get organized, but also to get involved, to join organizations. If that 6 weeks moves on without you, it really gets difficult at that point to get on that train, because you start looking around and you feel like everybody knows what's going on, everybody has it together, and why don't I? And so we pay a lot of attention to our students early on in the first 6 weeks.
Thank you, Todd. We are getting some great feedback in the chat about the structure that you've provided for us and sort of this practical advice that we can provide to students. And I think, just your experience with actually what happens on the other end when they get to you provides some helpful perspective. Are there any other sort of, I'm not seeing any other questions come through in the Q&A, but are there any other sort of last pieces of advice or things that we could do that would be valuable for our students, particularly our first generation students whose families may not have the same experiences, who may have other concerns heading into college, that we can just do to support them and make sure that they are set up for success as well as we can set them up?
Oftentimes we think of questions the day after. And so you can think of a question in May. If you want to email me, please do not hesitate. I would be delighted to be a resource to you and for you. So.
Hey, Todd.
Yes.
One question. This is Sarah McKenzie, everybody. I know we get a lot of questions from public school counselors about what can they do because they are overwhelmed with such big caseloads. And so if you were going to do just one or two things, any pieces of advice if you don't have as much time, or to dedicate to a program, for example, for students?
Yeah. You could create something that could be, it could be pre-recorded like this, and you could offer it up as something they could watch on their own free time. You could probably even make a pamphlet that just hits the highlights and and give it to them. We give them a lot of handouts when they get here. You could say, these are the 3 pointers, or here's where you go for this, this, and this on a typical college campus. And so it may be that you don't have time to put aside an hour to do a presentation such as this, but maybe there's a way to give them something as a handout to take with them. Maybe they will read it, maybe they won't. I often think it goes in a drawer. If they don't see it, perhaps a parent will look at it. Again, if they have 3 takeaways for something that they take with them to college, you may just say the 3 takeaways could be to get involved, to find your people on campus, and to don't be afraid to ask for help. Never, ever be afraid to ask for help. So, this is why we work in education. We want our students to ask us for help. And the thing I often tell students when my students is that imagine you're sitting in a classroom and you look disconnected or disengaged because on your phone. And when that professor is thinking, is this paper a B or a C? And it can kind of lean one way or the other. They know the students that are engaged. They know the students that are paying attention, that are smiling, that are asking questions, that are coming a little bit early, that talk with them, stay a little bit afterwards. They're just some simple ways to stay involved on the campus. And so those professors want those students to learn the material. So they want students to ask them for help. I mean, faculty want their students to learn. So don't ever be afraid to ask for help from anybody on the campus. I have found just about everywhere I've ever worked, and I've worked at 5 institutions, that from the student accounts office to the dining hall to the dean of students, people are opening and welcoming and want students to come in and say, how I'm stuck, I don't know where to turn. So tell them to not be afraid to reach out to anybody.
Todd, we're getting a couple of requests from our attendees, whether or not this PowerPoint presentation is something that you would be willing to share with them so that they could have access to it to craft their own after the fact?
Absolutely. There's no doubt about that. So you want me to send the PowerPoint to you, Joanna?
Yes, and if you just want to share that with me, and we'll try to get it out to the list of attendees so that everyone who's interested in having access to it can. That would be great.
Okay, it'll be to you before 11.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Looks like
Okay, we have another question in the Q&A. For many families, especially first gen, financial aid is a huge hurdle and a scary process. What support and advice should we be giving to families and students with the financial aid process?
I wish I had more information about that, but I will say, obviously, they should have completed their FAFSA. If not, get it done quickly. There's more money out there than we could imagine for students. And it really depends on the schools. If some schools are much more well endowed, and they're obviously need blind. So when you're accepted, they don't know how much financial need you have. And then a lot of schools will find ways to make it affordable for students. So don't feel discouraged. You really even don't feel discouraged to apply to private schools. Surprisingly, sometimes private schools will end up being less expensive than public institutions, just based on how they want to make sure it's accessible and they can get their education in a private school. I have found that talking to the student accounts office or the financial aid office and just staying on top of that is helpful. And it can be a little frustrating because you can get bumped to 2 or 3 offices, and I've even experienced that myself. But don't give up. They will get back to you, and they typically will give you the information that you need. Also, if students are academically gifted and have done quite well in high school, there are a lot of local scholarships that students can apply for, and they may only be $1,000, but it really all adds up. So seek some of those. Maybe you look in your community, you can Google them. I know here in Fayetteville, there are foundations that have lots of scholarships for students, and you'd be surprised that churches and women's clubs and Kiwanis clubs, all kinds of civic organizations have scholarships for college students. And a lot of those scholarships are really clearly defined for specific demographic populations. So it might be that they find something that they would qualify more for. So it takes some homework. You have to put some effort into it. The scholarships are not going to come looking for you necessarily. You do have to put some time and energy into looking for those. And then they take a bit of time to apply for. And don't get discouraged, because we went through that with my older son, and he applied for lots of scholarships because he had done well, but never heard back from some, did not get some others, and got 3 or 4. So there's money out there.
Well, I think if there are no other questions, I just wanted to take this opportunity to say thank you. You're getting, again, some great feedback in the comments section. So we are really grateful for your insight and appreciate your time. Before we go into the breakout sessions, we're gonna go ahead and take a little 5-minute break. So if everyone could just be back here at 10. then we will go ahead and get the breakout sessions started at that time. So we'll just take a quick 5-minute stretch break, and we'll see you back here at 10 o'clock. Skip the break. We're going to skip the break that we had initially planned since we took a longer one unintentionally earlier today. And we're going to head into our final session of the day today, which is what does test optional really mean? And we're very happy to have Sean Kennedy, who's a co-director of college counseling at Ravenscroft Academy, with us today to discuss that. So I'm going to just keep things moving and pass it over to Sean. Thank you so much, Sean.
All right, thank you, everybody. Hello, hello, hello from Raleigh. Just pull up my screen here momentarily. So appreciate the ability to talk a little bit about test optional admissions. It was nice to see the admission panel discuss what that looks like when things are actually under review. I wanted to take a time to look at this from sort of a high school standpoint and what we've seen in the past, you know, however many 2 years it's been, and share some observations, but then also have an opportunity, with time permitting, for you all to share some of your experiences. So this is kind of the agenda, at least for what we're going to discuss, kind of looking at terms and some resources, some current issues, some suggestions and strategies, and then with the time permitting, we'd love to hear some of your test optional experiences. As with most things in admissions, the word "it depends" matters always. And so some of the things that we've seen in our context may not necessarily be things that you have seen, and that what we have as far as time remaining to be able to share some of your stories would be awesome. So just to review some of the terminology that has developed not only previously prior to the pandemic, but in the midst of the pandemic. Obviously, test optional, testing is not required. That is so the providing of the scores is a student choice. Test blind, test free, or score free. There's a couple different iterations of that. Testing is not used. That is the institution's choice about the role that testing is played. And then test flexible, sort of multiple testing options. So it might be SAT or ACT, or it might be multiple AP exams or other things that are, the student has the choice to put forward whatever testing kind of combo they would want if that suits their background and interest. NYU is a good example of that. In case you're curious to read a particular institution's policy. You have to provide, you need to provide something, but it's going to have some flexibility to what that looks like. So just wanted to start with that to make sure we were kind of all working from the same terminology. So I think one of the things that as a counselor has been the biggest challenge is what is the college's policy? There are over 3,000 institutions. By at least the most current count, we've been somewhere between 1,800 to 2,000 test optional policies, but those have looked very different. I think the thing we keep telling students, and I'm sure you as that are school counselors, is you've got to check the college website to make sure that, okay, when they say they're test optional, in what way are they test optional? Are there nuances to it? Are they test optional for the evaluation part, but then they're going to ask you for the test score once you're enrolled? That means you need to have a test at some point, but you just don't have to provide it when you're being evaluated. Some won't care about it at all. So yes, if you see lists out there that says, oh, great, this place went test optional, again, make sure you ask the student, or you do, homework as much as you can to make sure that, okay, they're test optional, but in what way? I think we see, and right now as we're in the spring and we're looking forward to the group that's going to be current juniors, schools are announcing policies, almost on a weekly basis. And so I think we continue to need to look throughout the spring to find out, okay, all right, is this place continuing a policy, enacting a policy? Are they tweaking it? And I think it's fair to expect that those decisions are going to be made throughout the spring and possibly even into summer. One of the most, bizarre examples happened this Wednesday with the University System of Georgia, that their board voted to, be test optional or waive the testing requirement for the fall of 2022 admission. However, not for all public universities, just for all the public universities except UGA, Georgia Tech, and Georgia State. So all of the other public institutions are now have the ability to have students apply for fall 2022 admission and not have scores considered. If you're curious to know what that looks like, Georgia Southern sent out a couple of good counselor emails that they are even going back to look at already applied students who might have benefited from not having submitted a score and being evaluated without that score, and going back to essentially reevaluate them. So that's a really unique one, not for fall of 2023, but for fall of 2022. That's a change that happened this week. But again, it's not for Georgia Tech, it's not for UGA, and it's not for Georgia State. So read what the college says. That's always the best guidance. I think Fair Test, for those of you that follow that, continues kind of to be the most exhaustive resource for tracking and following what's happening in the test score use landscape out there, obviously for test optional policies and the rest. They also have a good resource for if you are working with students that are international students. There is a list that is, I think, maintained by Sarah DeLorean Garcia that says, okay, if you have an international student, will that college still require the testing, even though they may have a test optional policy somewhere else? So there's a separate list there, which I always find helpful for my students that are here with us, but are going to be classified as international students. So check out Fair Test. There's good stuff there. And then I've found in the past 2 years that the blogs and materials and information that both Compass Education Group, or Compass Test Prep, and Appleroot Education out of Atlanta, that they've provided really great insights into some of these shifts in policies and anticipating things about test score changes, test format changes, and the rest. That if you're not connected to both of those companies, I think they do a nice job of providing counselor-focused information to help you understand, okay, when policies are announced, when changes are announced, what does it actually mean? I think they've been, those have both been two really positive resources that I've certainly learned a lot from. All right, so let's talk about a couple different issues that pop up as a part of all of this. I think the first is that the UNC system waiver. So remember, the policy was to waive the standardized testing requirement that is part of the minimum admission requirements for the system. That waiver expired, and the Board of Governors did not renew the waiver at their most recent meeting. And so as of today, all of the system campuses are requiring testing. So those juniors and younger students for right now will be required to submit testing. Now if you remember that if you look at the system requirements, you can qualify for admission to a UNC system campuses with either a GPA, the requisite GPA, or the test score. Doesn't guarantee admission, but you still have to present it and provide it in the admission process as of today. So if you hadn't heard about that change or shift, know that is in effect for your juniors that are going to be applying next year. So that's at least our system. We heard about the California State University system going test blind going forward. So some systems are, some systems are not, but at least our public university system is moving forward with requiring testing again. U.S. News and U.S. News ranking methodology. I think for whatever your personal feelings are about it, I think one of the things that's been interesting is it continues to be a tool and a resource that is consulted and relied upon and used, perhaps not with not necessarily in the best manner by our students and families and other entities. But it's important to understand sort of how testing plays a role in those rankings. It has had a reduced role over time as other factors have come in. It's about 5% of the current methodology, which on the whole is not particularly statistically significant compared to some of the other factors. But it's important to know what's happened with those rankings as it relates to test use changes and policies at the colleges. So one of the things with for colleges that are test blind, so again, they're not collecting any information from applicants, so they don't in turn have test score data to provide to the U.S. News and World Report. The U.S. News and World Report basically assigns them a value based on the lowest score in their rankings. So whatever, if you have a school that is test blind and you see testing information anywhere populated within their rankings, that is something that the U.S. News and World Report provided and is considered as the lowest number possible. The way I explain this to students sometimes is if you think about a grade that's a pass-fail, a pass, if you have a pass, that doesn't mean that it's calculated in your GPA as an A+. It's calculated in as basically the lowest passing grade that you can find. So it might be a 70 or a 60. So that can sometimes create arbitrary ratings in the rest. And so if you see test blind schools their rankings begin to change and students or parents begin to wonder whether the school isn't suddenly as good as it used to be for whatever reason, and they have a test blind policy, it could be that that's just the methodology kind of creating these unique movements within that. Also, and then that you look at the second quote, that's more about essentially kind of revaluing how much that the test score factors into that overall weighting and ranking of the score if they are submitting under 50% of those under 50% of the incoming students are presenting scores than the rest. So just know that that test policies and the accumulation of test data by colleges and what they're deciding to turn over to colleges will absolutely impact in some way some of those rankings that you're seeing, and some of the information that may even be published in the U.S. News and World Report. That data, those middle 50% ranges or the rest, might not be as reliable or as valuable as you might think that they are. Another thing about influence of just the testing data. So when you collect information, as a school, and you have a university that is may not have as many data points that are being selected, that can skew data. So what you're looking at here is a screenshot from the UNC System Interactive Data Dashboard, which, if you are not familiar with this, if you go to www.northcarolina.edu, this is the system website. And among all the great information that's on it, there is also, you'll see, I think it's on the home page on the right-hand side, an option to select interactive data dashboards. And this is a screenshot from a tab that comes up within that data system on sort of freshman admission and first year performance. One of the things you'll notice is that you see over the course of these entering terms, and this is a system-wide information, this screenshot, which you're looking at, is all of a sudden for entering the fall of 2021, so as a year, basically that group, that class of 2021 that had, their senior year testing and even some of that spring of 2020 impacted their ability to test. You saw pretty big drop-offs in, if you're looking at the number of students that submitted testing. So you look at the ACT column, for instance, you saw that steadily grow over the years. Some of that obviously aided by the public high school contract for ACT testing that grew those numbers. But then all of a sudden, a really stark drop off between fall of 2020 and fall of 2021. You look at the SAT score, again, those numbers holding somewhat consistent, at least most of the years, but then all of a sudden a really staggering drop off from there. But what you notice about the average test score is that those went up. This is at least one reflection, and there are many if you really want to keep looking for them, about how when there are fewer numbers per, fewer test scores or data points provided, it stands to reason that when the scores are strong, students will submit them. And when the scores are not as strong, students are not submitting them. So you have a positively skewed test average by virtue of students having the option to submit testing or not. You see a little bit more, where in those previous years when everyone had to submit the testing, you saw that number be lower because there was going to be lower scores that had to be submitted no matter what. In the fall 2021, data, at least, you may not have seen those scores be submitted by student choice. And so the numbers get inflated. So this is one example. I think there's more of that you might see, particularly as you get into some of the middle 50% ranges. A couple of examples, so when you think about that, the influence on testing data, you might see, if you were looking at middle 50% data ranges over the past few years, sort of pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, you might have seen large jumps in them. So the example here that's on the screen is from UGA. As an example, you look at entering fall 2020, even though the pandemic was sort of impacting the spring, by and large, the senior class had largely completed their testing. And so you see those test ranges. Well, fast forward a year, you see a really big jump in that middle 50. Now that was sort of expected, because again, you have a self-selection of students to provide testing or not provide testing, which was the case for University of Georgia, at this time, that the 2021 class was the group that had the option not to submit testing. There was some thought and belief that maybe that would be a one-year anomaly, and that testing would settle back down once everybody retested again, or was required to submit testing for Georgia. But you see that it held pretty flat in line with that. So the reliability of those middle 50% ranges, I think, are something to pay close attention to as you're trying to advise students on, well, geez, is my score, should I send it? Is it in line with what they want? We're not that far removed from the pre-pandemic, ranges. And, if you've got a student that, if you're looking at those, 1350 to 1330, and you've got a student that's a 1300, maybe it's something that they should think about sending, even though it's not squarely within that range, because that 1300 just 2 years ago would have been squarely within the range. Those are kind of conversations that you can have. If you're trying to find that information, like, geez, I don't know what the middle 50 was for a college in the past, I think the Common Data Set can be a really great tool for that. So if you're not familiar with how to utilize Common Data Set, if you have a particular university in mind, just Google, Common Data Set and the college name. And then in that report, if you go to section C9 under freshman profile, it's usually on a page anywhere between page 10 to 13. You'll find the university submitted test score ranges for what they provided. So again, these are universities providing it to a commonly organized and grouped set of data. That if you can't find it on their old websites or any other old guides, that the Common Data Set can be a great place to find that kind of historical information that is there. You might be able to find some of the 2021 data now. You won't find obviously any for 2022 yet, but just keep that in mind that there's sometimes a lag in institutions reporting that information, but that can be a great tool to utilize to at least provide some context to understand the pre and during pandemic numbers. Some other things just on influence on admission decisions. And I think this is the thing that I've been most curious about as we've been going through this and following, okay, great. So students make decisions about whether to submit testing or not submit. You know, how is it actually playing out that if they submit or they don't submit in terms of their, selectivity and admissibility to the university. So this is a chart that Compass put together back in September, just gathering from, a sampling of schools about, all right, what were the admit rates for this past class? So again, entering class of 2021, the current college freshmen. What were the admit rates for those students that submitted testing compared to those that did not? Now, this is a sampling, so it's not reflective of every college in the United States, but certainly one that's useful. And what you're looking at here is that sort of aquamarine colored bars being those that the admit rate with testing was higher, and the admit rate without testing. And that number at the top of the bar is essentially sort of the perceived advantage to that. So the picture that this paints is that in a lot of cases, those with testing still benefited from submitting and having that presumably high testing or testing that is consistent with the test ranges that are there. Now, whether this will continue to play out in this cycle or not, I don't know. If you've got, again, we have an opportunity to maybe share some stories at the end. Would love to hear more about that, but that's certainly something I think we've seen in some cases, not just at these universities, obviously the majority of them private, but even in some other, plenty of other, some public universities as well. So, these are some of the things I think that we've, we've seen in our context here. As far as just suggestions and things, I think that one of the questions that I found myself asking a lot more is whether, they're test optional or, test requiring or flexible, is how you are using the tests, because just because it's required does not necessarily mean that it is used universally in the same manner at every school. Their schools have the ability to provide, if you think about even some of the public university systems, yes, you have to require testing, but there's not necessarily guidance or requirements about how it's utilized, the percentage of the evaluation that it must have in the application process. I grew up in Southern California and worked and read for UCLA, about 20 years ago. And that was right at the advent of them moving away from a two-tiered system where testing may have, almost a numerical value within the process. It was anywhere between 40 to 40% sometimes, and how a student could be admitted solely based on testing and, the University of California system GPA. It moved to a much more holistic process, which is probably more reflective of a lot of places. But how it's used now, I think, is a great question to ask, particularly of test optional schools. So if they have historically required testing, now that they are saying it's okay, we can evaluate you with or without testing, I think it's a fair question to ask. Okay, if a student provides a test score and it may or may not be as competitive as you're looking for, is it going to hurt the student if it's unusually low? Or is it going to be not necessarily disregarded, but not be a negative factor? Maybe it's a neutral or a non-factor if a student submits. So those are the type of questions I find myself asking a lot more beyond what is your policy? Are you test optional? Are you test flexible? Then ask, okay, well, how do you utilize the testing in your evaluation? But one of the things I think, we would always like to see more of is transparency from admission offices about all kinds of things related to their process and their data, but particularly about the test submission and acceptance. And I think the data point that is most valuable when you're thinking about this is the percent of admits submitting and not submitting. So if you look back at that screen before about the disparity in the admit rates for those that submitted and those that not, some universities have been great about putting that information out there. Some, there's nothing to be found, and when you ask for follow-up, it's not provided. So I think continuing to ask those questions at each cycle and say, hey, what, this is, as a counselor, this is really helpful tool for us to help advise students better, when we're having these discussions about should I send my score or not. And we're adding that to our conversations with students, having that figure to say, well, okay, here's your score is this in relation to this university's expectations, and this university has a particular percentage, a very high percentage of students that submit testing that are admitted, or the inverse, that there's a really low accept rate for students that don't submit to testing. So maybe it's in your best interest to submit it, even though it's lower. Just to give that data point to them, that rather than assume that maybe your lower score isn't as low as it could be, but give them that number to hold on to. So I think continuing to push colleges to provide that becomes a great counseling resource and tool for us to use. And then, again, asking colleges about a particular score. We did that on a couple of occasions with universities over the past couple of years, when we asked a school and said, hey, we have a student that has a 25, should they send that score or not? And some universities have been great about saying, you know what, don't send it, and we could say, okay, great. We talked to place X, they said don't send it, and so you're not going to send that. Some of that has come through in direct outreach to the college. We've heard a little of that sometimes come through in virtual sessions. The college will say, we're really looking for scores over 1,300, which is a signal that, okay, if you've got that 1220, it's a fine score, but for that college, it's maybe not good, not as good as what they're looking for. So I think that, when in doubt, ask. They might say no. They might say, they might kind of give you an it depends kind of response, but sometimes you'll get that clarity that allows you to not only advise that one student on their situation, but then to advise all the other students that you might have that are applying to that college as well. So these, to me, are the things that I find myself now going through, sort of another having finishing up another cycle of utilizing these scores, and now working to try to advise another class that are coming up that are wrestling with this. These are the things that I find myself asking colleges much, much more than I ever thought to before. Another thing just about sort of what else we're doing, I think, back to the transparency thing, I think, there's, of all of the decisions that students are trying to make, of all of the things we are trying, as counselors, trying to help them manage in the midst of this process. I mean, there has been, a fair amount of stress associated with whether to send or not send scores, and trying to negotiate and navigate yet another level of difference among colleges. And this is where I think that transparency piece is the best course of action, to try to get that information so we have the tools and resources to be able to talk to students. The ability to have to make that choice about whether to send scores or not, or if they're in a situation of test blind or test free, that they're not going to be considered at all, certainly benefits students for whom, testing is not going to reflect positively on their ability as a student. You heard from some of the admission folks that did the case studies about what a test score represents in their offices, and sort of a lesser value relative to some of the other parts of the application process, which is certainly positive to hear. So the ability to not have that element added in at all is certainly a great option for students for whom that's simply not going to benefit them. However, trying to figure out if they do test, is their score positive? I think that's where we really need more of that transparency from the college level to help, try to mitigate a little bit of the stress that's associated with yet one more decision that students have to make in their process. I think as we've been thinking about how to help and advise students with approaching testing, knowing that from year to year, some policies have changed, some have remained. The UNC system, change, when we could say for the previous class, okay, hey, no, they extended their policy. So guess what, you all, you guys can move forward and we can have a testing conversation, that knowing that this is an opportunity. We were kind of waiting on those until February. As policies evolve and change, I think we continue to find ourselves in a position to tell students that, you should move forward as though testing, might matter for you. It could be valuable for you, that you should prepare for it and as though it would be meaningful and valuable to you. And then to find yourself, if, in the fall and what your college list looks like, that then you can make decisions about where and when you have to send it and where and when it will benefit you. I'm a parent of an 11th grader right now, and that's the exact same thing I'm telling her that I'm telling my students, that, you need to take the test. And because I have yet to have a couple of years into this, a student that I could confidently advise, early enough in the process to say, your schools that you're applying to will not require tests and won't need it. So guess what? You do not have to take the test at all. I've yet to have that. I can't envision that being the case going forward. It would be nice if, we're able to do that, but, no matter what, students are, still seem to find a need to have to take the tests, if for no other reason to, kind of keep their options open as they are developing and exploring their college lists, and trying to make some decisions about where to apply in the fall. When to send a score, in relation to mid 50%, this is a really difficult. It was tough for me to write this bullet point, because just as I was writing it, I could think of both a lot of reasons to say, if you're close to that middle 50, maybe it's valuable to send it. To me, I'm thinking about those, if you look back at those Georgia numbers, for instance, and you're thinking about a range of an ACT range, for instance, of 31 to 34, and your student has a 29, maybe that's worth sending for that student if that's going to, kind of substantiate something that helps their overall profile. That might, mean the 19, for instance, if it's aberrantly low or well under the policy, then, that's one that's like, listen, that's not going to help you in any form or fashion. So keep that score out of the picture. But if it's close, there could be value in it. And the one thing I come back to is, if you're thinking about the mind of an admission officer, and as if you have a data point that's low, but it's, okay, let's again use that 31 as the bottom of the middle 50. Having a 29, which is under, versus no score at all, where does your mind go? Does your mind go to the fact that perhaps there's no score because it's unusually low and there's a presumed or perceived, like what my kids ask me, like, do you think that will they think I'm being evasive if I don't provide the score? I mean, there's, that's not a meritless assumption or curiosity. So that's right. Sometimes I think if you're close to that range, maybe it might be better to provide it. But again, that's one of those depends type things. The other thing is just waiting until the fall before sending the score reports. I know that there's a great urgency to take advantage of those, those free score report sends, and those, from a standpoint of, reducing cost associated with it. But remember that when they send, when a student sends those scores officially, you're then, but you're providing them the scores that could be utilized later. Now, yes, in your applications, you have the ability to indicate that you want to suppress that possibly, or not have your scores considered, but you got to remember to do that. Otherwise, the scores are already in the building. And so those places that are, allow you to put those scores in or wait to provide them later or self-report them. Encompass has good resources on sort of keeping a list of the colleges that allow self-reporting. Again, that's a matter of the student controlling the providing the scores until a point when they are comfortable and there's an approach to say, okay, we're providing them everywhere or providing them to a few places, but maybe not all of them. So when students ask, should I go ahead and send it? I usually will tell them maybe to hold off until maybe a later attempt, their last attempt, and to provide those scores or to self-report them in their applications. Okay, so I'd asked you earlier to think a little bit about your own stories, and would love to hear what you all have experienced, even whether it's different from what I've shared, from our experience. We've got looks like about 5 to 7 minutes or so to do that. So if you've got something you'd like to share, then maybe put it in the chat. I don't know, Joanna, or can they unmute to share things?
They can raise hands and we can unmute them.
Okay, so raise your hand if you'd like to talk, just like you being a good student. I'm sure.
And I wanted to say, I think one of the things that you touched on today was really helpful for me, was that I think a lot of my students have an all or nothing approach, where they feel like they're either going to send them everywhere or they're not going to send them anywhere. And when we start to sit down and try and parse that a little bit more closely and meaningfully, some of them that it tends to be a place where they have some difficulty. So it's always helpful to continue to have those conversations. So I appreciated hearing more from you about that as part of the conversation.
Yeah, and we at our school, the past couple of years, we've tracked that with students, and have found that in our population, we had about half of the class that whose scores were strong enough that they sent it everywhere. We had another probably about the 30 to 35% that were sort of a targeted send, send it one place but not another, and then a very, very small number in most cases that didn't send at all. So those were pretty rare. So the majority still did that, but that really has become part of the fall kind of, all right, you're finalizing your college list, that we've started to sort of attach that, okay, here's where you're applying. Let's talk about when you're applying, like for which deadline, and then are you going to send your score or not? We kind of marry those discussions. We sort of marry that, now have added that piece to it. I think Deb.
Deb, I think you're unmuted. So
yeah,
I think you can go ahead.
Thanks so much, Sean. It's always so great to see you. Thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your insights. They're always so helpful. I think my question is really about colleges that are remaining test optional, but it seemed like from this year's results that they didn't quite figure out how to read with test optional admissions. So I'm thinking particularly of some state institutions south of us that really seemed to just defer an enormous number of students who applied test optional in the early action round. And I'm wondering if you think that they will sort of, as they remain test optional, be able to sort of figure out how to read applications without test scores better, or to have, if students will have different results once. I think part of the fear too is what's the academic success going to be like of those students who were admitted without test scores, which was part of what the Board of Governors was talking about in their meetings. But what's your thought about sort of schools going forward beginning to be honestly better at being test optional?
Right. Yeah, it's a great question, because I think you have to keep in mind that this sort of spike in test optional policies was largely driven by, inavailability of testing opportunities. These were not necessarily philosophical moves that said, hey, wow, we've looked at all of the very clear and evident data. If any of you sort of follow the work of, John Bockenstedt or Akil Bello and, some of those, those luminaries out there in our business that are doing great work about digging into, the systemic, problems within that testing presents in a lot of different demographics, that those were not necessarily the reasons for a lot of these shifts. Now, some, yes, some it was an availability and a philosophical decision. So I think the fact that colleges moved in this direction is now, as we move, as the pandemic becomes hopefully endemic in our society, and colleges are starting to make those decisions about whether to continue the policies, hopefully the rationale behind keeping those decisions becomes one that's philosophical, and that there's ability to say, okay, now let's structure how we're going to read and shift things. I think obviously the ability to attract more applicants and more applicants that fit institutional priorities is obviously helpful. So I see a comment about not wanting to lose students. Of course, that's a powerful motivator to keep the applicant pools robust and growing. But I do think that the combination of training and evaluating, and I was talking with Sarah Sarah on the call just the other day about, you think about how many, when I remember when I read for UCLA a decade ago, we had historical data for lots of different things, but I didn't know what the SAT tested. I didn't know what it meant, how to utilize it in the same way. And we did a lot of training. I was going off of, hey, when I was in high school, what it took to get into UCLA as a student, and what that meant. And so I think that there's a lot of, uneven usage of that I think if there's a training and norming associated with what the test actually truly measures, and whether it's really valuable in that context, that maybe there are going to be some moves within offices to say, okay, this is what our test optional policy is going to mean now. And this is kind of back to that question that, the point, Deb, about great, you're test optional, but how do you actually use it? And what are the sort of percentages of utilizing it in the rest? Because I think I know the universities that you're referring to, and we certainly saw the same thing.
Thank you so much, Sean. We are, I guess, hitting right at noon now. So I don't see any other hands raised, but we really appreciate your insight and the work on this. I think it's been really informative and helpful, and the common data set is always a subject of conversation. So that's a useful resource. So thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today. We really appreciate it. I just have a couple of more slides that we need to share today with you before we let you escape. So I'm going to share my screen one more time, and then we will go ahead and let you out of here for today. We really are so pleased that so many of you were with us. So let me get my slideshow up and running. And we wanted to just make sure that everybody had information about SACAC membership, so that if you are not a member of SACAC, we hope that you will consider becoming a member. It's a wonderful organization that provides lots of great professional development opportunities outside of these drive-in workshops. So there's some information here about that. And of course, you can also reach out to either Sarah or myself for more information. We also wanted to say one more time, a big thank you to our sponsor of our drive-in workshops, Revolution Prep. And if you have questions for them, we will be sending out a recording of the slideshow, which I think does include the slides from the beginning, with the information about contacting them. So please feel free to reach out to them for more information. And Sarah, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
No, I think I just want to say thank you all so much for being here. We really appreciate taking time out of your busy schedules to hear this information and to interact with us.
I just wanted to say a huge shout out to Joanna and Sarah on behalf of the SACAC board. Thank you guys so much for all the work that you put in to this event. It was wonderful. And I know that everyone that attended was so grateful for the ability to be able to get some professional development and to learn so much great information. So thank you ladies so much for doing all of that work.
Thank you. We appreciate it. And we're just glad that we were able to share all this today. And I think Sarah has said in the chat, we will be sending out some more information, including the recording. And I'll also include, because I know it was requested, we'll have Todd Harris's presentation will be part of that as well. Okay, well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.